Welcome to Dan's On Site with Dan Dutton and Dan Goley, a podcast and YouTube show dedicated to all things real estate, delivering market information, interviews from all perspectives, and tips for everyone involved in or interested in real estate. We'd love to hear from you. dans@dansonsite.com. Welcome to Dan's On Site mini episode, second quarter retail market report for Omaha, Nebraska. The second quarter saw a positive absorption of 81,224 square feet, largely due to a few transactions. Vacancy is forecast to grow through the end of 2020 and into 2021. The growing vacancy rate will likely have a downward pressure on rents during this period. Sales volume has dropped significantly through the initial half of 2020, with per square foot value also dropping during this time and expected to continue to drop into 2021. As we continue through 2020, we will keep watch on how COVID impacts the retail market, how retailers and restaurants perform now that their PPP funds have been used, number of bankruptcies through the end of the year, and how that translates to store closings, how activity fares with prior recent years during the fall season. Join us now for an interview with retail experts Grace Newton and jyork. Enjoy the show. Welcome to Dan's On Site. Joining us today, Grace Newton and jyork for our first mini episode discussing the retail market in Omaha, Nebraska. Thank you guys very much for joining us. Overall, it looks like there was more square feet leased than vacated during the second quarter. What are you guys seeing in the marketplace?
Yes, correct. So there was more square feet leased in the second quarter than was vacated. I think that's rolling off of a pretty strong 2019. But for quarter two, it was really highlighted by about 4 or 5 deals that took up a lot of square footage. So that kind of made up the bulk of that positive absorption.
And as we're starting to see some restaurants and retail places close, there's still been a lot of local people that we've talked to that are going to take advantage of this and move to new spaces.
You know, it's kind of interesting. You know, retail has always been one of those topics that I always like to talk to people about. And, you know, when they read the news, they see all these things that are out there and how terrible it is, and then the impacts of Amazon. And quite frankly, what we're seeing on some of the data is that it's a little bit better than what people are actually hearing. And so as we're rolling into the second half of this year, and the buzzword we hear is absorption, which is essentially a new tenant leasing a bay that currently sits vacant. How do you see the second half of this year playing out? We're going to see more tenants coming in. Are there, what do you think is going to happen?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think by now we've probably all heard of a few national tenants that will be exiting, specifically our market, other markets around the country. So we know right off the bat there's going to be some negative leasing going on. However, we know of quite a few local and also nationals that are either getting ready to open their doors for the second half of the year or finalizing some deals. So I think given the situation, given this year that no one would have predicted, I'm still pleasantly surprised with how I think retail leasing will go in the second half, but that's not to say it's going to be stellar.
So Jordan, we all know COVID's a real thing, and we've had to deal with it in commercial real estate, specifically in retail. How has retail been affected by COVID? I know we hear about the PPP loans, and those guys have probably used up their money now, but how do you think retail was specifically affected during the second quarter, and how do you think it'll be affected going through the end of the year?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see as people get through their first round of PPP stuff, and if there will be a second round of it come out. I think we'll see a lot of changes going forward in how leases are structured as well.
And I think there's people out there that are being very opportunistic during this time, whether that's keeping an eye out for a location to relocate, open a second location. And then we're also seeing a lot of business owners and retail owners that have been enforced to be creative during this time of COVID. And I think the people that have been creative will fare better than those that weren't.
Yeah, I think we'll see, a lot more drive-through concepts, things like that, so that way people can keep their doors open if another round of this hits comes fall.
It's interesting with the drive-thrus. We've mentioned this before on other podcasts. Restaurants that have never had a drive-thru have now come to us and said, we need a drive-thru going forward. Or national concepts that may have only had 1 or 2 locations with a drive-thru, or a handful of locations with drive-thru, said, we're only doing drive-thrus from this point forward. And Grace, you mentioned there's some businesses out there really looking for opportunities in the marketplace. We've done a couple deals recently in the middle of all this where people have wanted to go after locations that they wouldn't have otherwise been able to get. And Goalie, I don't know, you've talked before about some of the lease clauses that are going to come out of this.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to be consistent yet, and I think the market's still trying to figure it out, but it's the pandemic clauses that are starting to show up. And you're starting to see this more from the national retailers, the large big box people that have hundreds, if not thousands nationwide, as we say. The mom and pops or the small local retailers may not really see that type of thing. But I do know that, a lot of those clauses are going to start coming into play, because what happens is in some of the, the larger retailers, you see them, if a pandemic hits, then essentially their rent obligations reduce, therefore impacting the loan possibly for the current landlord, could impact the vacancy or the occupancy level, however you want to look at it. And so then, it kind of rolls into the next thing is a lot of these mom and pops are looking to buy. Maybe the smaller local ones, we mentioned a drive-through. Maybe they don't need, their business doesn't call for a 5,000 square foot space. Maybe they only need an 1,800 in a drive-through as they go around. And so one lender I did talk to recently, the government's out there, and I think it's under-publicized, is the fact that some of these owner users can go out and get a loan, and the government, or however it's worked out through, I'm sure, a voucher system, if qualified and pushed through, can have 6 months of their mortgage payments made by the government to the lien holder or the lender. And so those are positive things. Have you seen the sales volumes increase? Is there a price per square foot impact because of COVID? What are your thoughts, or kind of what do you see where everything is and where's it going?
Yeah, you bring up a good point of touching on what landlords have been doing throughout this. And I think we've all probably seen landlords also needing to jump on the opportunities when they present themselves this year. So whether it's being more flexible with like a free rent period, starting out with a lower rent than they maybe otherwise would have, and then increasing that rent over time. So I do think going forward over the next 6 months or so, you will see a dip in rental rates, I think, as an incentive from landlords to get these deals done.
Well,
that could impact a lot of sales. I mean, investment sales could be impacted by this as well.
And it might just be too early to know exactly what's going to happen in the sales market. I think there's a lot of interesting things out there that could happen. And a lot of it's going to be, is there a second stimulus, which is something I think we have to look for going forward, and just how COVID eventually plays out. Well, I can't thank you guys enough for joining us today, adding your expert input on what's happening in the marketplace. Tell everybody how they can get a hold of you guys.
Yeah, you can reach me on my email at jyork, Jyork, at OMNE, OMNE partners.com.
And I can be reached via my cell phone, 402-980-0111.
Best of the best right here. So please drop them an email if they can help you out. As always, thanks for tuning in to this episode of Dan's On Site. Catch us on Facebook, Dan's On Site, or all the podcast platforms, always on YouTube. We'd love to hear from you. If you have questions about the retail market or just general, stories about what's happening out in the marketplace, drop us a line, dans@dansonsite.com.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks again for joining us. Find us on Facebook, at YouTube, Dan's On Site. All your favorite podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more. We would love it if you hit the subscribe button and also leave us a review. reach us at dansonsite.com.